Good evening, everyone. I declare the meeting open at 6:02. I'd like to start by welcoming everyone to the meeting this evening. This is our council briefing, which is not the decision-making meeting, but the meeting where we invite you to make comment and council members will ask questions of administration. I'd like to start by acknowledging that tonight we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. In terms of apologies, we do have an apology from Councillor Dan Loden this evening. He's travelling for work, and Councillor Ros Harley is running a few minutes late but will be joining us. We'll now go to public question time and receiving of public statements. So this is your opportunity, members of the public gallery, to come forward and address council on an item that's on the agenda this evening. We do ask that you state your name, your address, the item that you're speaking to, and we do ask that you speak for up to 3 minutes. We do time the speaking because we do try to keep to time and keep the meeting running smoothly. So there's no order, it's just whoever wishes to come forward. So I will call forward the first person who wishes to speak. I'll now go to the CEO for declarations of interest.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Council members, we've only received one disclosure of interest this evening. It's a disclosure of impartiality interest from Councillor Joanne Fotakis on item 12.1. It's a confidential item. The nature of Councillor Fotakis' interest is that she completed work for the managing agent, Realmark Proprietary Limited, in 2016, which ended in December 2016. The company also displayed a sign during her election campaign from September to October 2017. As a consequence, there may be a perception that Councillor Fotakis' interest could be affected. Councillor Fotakis has declared that she will consider the matter on its merits and vote accordingly when it is discussed at next week's council meeting.
Thank you, CEO. We have had planning items 5.1 through 5.6 raised from the public gallery this evening, but we've also had community budget submissions raised, which is item 9.4. Given that those members of the public gallery will be waiting for some time if we work through it sequentially, I will suggest that we take questions in relation to item 9.4 first, which has come in as a late report. It's the community budget submissions for 2018, and then after this item we'll go back and work sequentially through the planning items. So are there any questions from council members in relation to item 9.4? No questions? Okay. There you go, no questions. All right, so that will be debated at next Tuesday's council meeting. So now we'll go to planning items. Planning item 5.1, 12 Scott Street, Leederville, single house. Questions? Councillor Hallett?
I'm not sure if it's relevant anymore, given the change in the public gallery, but I might just ask it anyway regarding the setback provisions in relation to this one. A concern was raised yesterday about the proposed front setback and the impact of the balcony on the privacy of the neighbouring property and a desire for the setback to be reduced. Whilst it would be highly irregular for council to seek a further deviation from the deemed to comply setback, has the applicant expressed any interest in reducing the setback further?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the applicant, anecdotally, the city staff are aware that the applicant is quite interested in a reduced front setback. I don't understand, I'm not sure whether they've been canvassed with the idea of increasing the setback so as to comply, but like I say, anecdotally, they've certainly expressed an interest in reducing the setback and bringing it closer to the street.
Councillors? Director, I have a question about Canopy and deep zone, and this is something I might sound like a bit of a broken record tonight because it does apply to 5.1, 5.3, 5.4 and 5.5. I've just noticed that whilst I note the situation that we have in relation to how that has been dealt with by the SCP, it is still for us to give due regard to those policy provisions for 30% tree canopy and 15% deep soil zone. And I'm wondering why we would not condition this application to provide 30% canopy. They have a huge amount of deep soil zone, but they are lacking on canopy. So I'm just wondering why that hasn't been conditioned, and I'll just flag that I would be seeking an amendment to condition the 30% tree canopy.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Proposed condition 4.1.3 refers to an on-site canopy of no less than 30% of the site area.
I retract my statement. Sorry about that. But I think that I may be coming back to this question further in the meeting. Further questions? Councillor Toppelberg.
Just seeking some clarity. So elevation 2, which appears on page 21 of the agenda, shows proposed 350 high lattice screening above the existing colorbond fencing, and colorbond fencing shown to be at 2100 high at some points. But I understand there's a difference in levels between the two properties. Can I just get some clarity as to... and I note that we also effectively changed our fencing provisions recently, that effectively if two neighbours agree that they can have whatever they like in between them, pretty much up to I think it was up to 2.4, so this would be at 2.45. But just for clarity, in the event this application was approved, on the neighbours' side of this lot, they will have a 2.45 metre fence that consists of colorbond and metal colorbond lattice sitting above it. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I kind of seek some clarification. You're talking about elevation 2?
Yeah, sorry, elevation 2. So that rear section is showing us proposed 350 high ladder screening above existing colorbond fencing, and I understand it so that at ground level to that property there's height shown of 1.76, 1.65, etc. But we're at 2.1 as it steps down to the rear. Just confirming that the addition of 350 mil of lattice will mean that there'll be a 2.45 metre metal fence between the two properties.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is correct, yes.
And does that need the consent of the neighbour in order for that to be able to be approved?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the fencing local laws do allow council to approve it, but do require the consent of the neighbour, as I understand it.
Can we maybe just ensure
that can be clarified?
Can we clarify that between now and next week, please? Just that the neighbour understands what the intent is, please.
Further questions? Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I have a question in relation to the street step back. I noticed that part of the justification for accepting the variation is that the development's largely screened by the existing boundary shed on the approach from the north. And my question is, do we measure that based on what is currently there with no regard to what might happen in the future? So if that boundary shed was to disappear, being on a neighbouring property, does that change things, or can we not bear that, take consideration of that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the application is to be determined as it is submitted before us, and at the moment we have that existing garage on the site. But we do acknowledge that that may be removed in future, and that would change the way a fresh application may have been assessed.
And just one further question in relation to the condition about canopy cover. It's administration's view that that 30% canopy cover can be reached. Is this something that you've discussed with the applicant, and have they indicated that they agree that they can meet that target, or is that something that may end up being a stumbling block for the whole application?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm not aware of any discussions directly with the applicant, but based on the plans submitted and the size of the site, staff are quite comfortable that 30% could be achieved.
Councillors? Okay, we'll move on to item 5.2, number 14 Orange Avenue, Perth, second storey addition to a group dwelling. Questions? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. I do know the answer, but I will ask just because it was asked from the gallery, just in relation to the issue or potential issue for looking into their shower or their bathroom recess, which has a window at 2.4 metres high. It has a highlight window that from the photograph that's been provided, there's potential for overlooking. Can we just get some clarity as to what the R codes say about whose responsibility it is, whether or not that can be seen into?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the R codes do in fact contain provisions regarding visual privacy, and on this occasion the submitted application does comply with those provisions, and there is no discretionary decision before council on this item. That is not to say necessarily that the proposed extension will not be visible from the highlight window as offered by the submitter, but from an R codes perspective the application is compliant.
Thank you. The deferral at the previous meeting, there were some issues that were to be resolved, one of which was the impact or potential impact upon the streetscape. There is some commentary about it, but can we just get some clarity from staff as to how they feel that the application in its current form does complement the streetscape? I note that I'm not sure at what height it's taken, but I note what is obviously a 2D image taken from directly adjacent to the house, but to the property, but doesn't afford the view that would be taken in where you'd see pretty much the whole of the extension as you headed south on Orange Avenue. But can we just get some clarity as to how staff feel that it meets that requirement under the policy?
Through you, Mayor Cole, as identified on page 30 of the agenda, a number of modifications were made to the plans. The changes as they relate to the streetscape impact are basically limited to the louvered windows on the eastern facade and the introduction of an eave to the front facade, as well as the changing of the materials on the northern facade. So it's acknowledged that by way of streetscape impact the changes are reasonably modest, but the collection of changes taken on balance have led administration to support the application.
Councillors, any further questions? Director, I'm not sure whether you received the handout from Mr Peter Holtz who spoke this evening. Is that something that you have before you? Just one of the issues raised there is the non-compliance of the lot boundary setback and building height impacts our amenity and access to light. Can you just outline whether the difference in impact on access to light from a compliant versus the proposed development, please?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I don't have the comparison, but I can provide that in the briefing notes. But as a general comment, the application as it's before you does actually comply with the solar access provisions, but in terms of providing a direct comparison, that can be provided in the coming days.
Thank you very much. Further questions, councillors? Okay. Thank you. Move on to item 5.3, number 42, Woodville Street, North Perth, proposed 6 dwellings. Councillor Gondaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the Director of Development Services. Just in relation to the query from the gallery in relation to privacy, there was a concern around balconies overlooking living spaces of adjacent properties. Are you able to provide some advice on that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can confirm that with regard to visual privacy, the application does comply with the deemed to comply provisions of the R codes by way of the highlight windows and the screening to 1.6 metres. You would have heard from the gallery that the applicant is open-minded regarding increasing that, and we will consult with them during the week.
I just also had a question in relation to the visitors' bays and in relation to, is there signage proposed to assist wayfinding to the visitors' bays?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can't say that there is signage provided, but it would not be unreasonable to recommend that be imposed as a condition if council was so inclined.
Would it be possible to get something drafted, the appropriate words? Thank you.
Councillors. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. I'll try very hard to make it a question. So just trying to understand the process that the applicant, I will actually ask explicitly, was it the applicant, the consultant or the designer that was present at the DAC meetings? I'll ask that firstly.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I am not sure, but can provide that through the briefing notes.
So in trying to work out how the design has evolved, I've got to ask as a question, don't I? Bugger. I'm just trying to work out... Actually, I'll wait till next week because I can't make it a question, so I'll just wait patiently. I might ask you offline.
Councillor Hallett.
Through the Mayor, to the Director of Development Services. The applicant proposed 10 parking bays, but only needs 8 according to deemed to comply. Was there any discussion about reducing car bays and potential variations which could then reduce bulk and increase landscaping? Or Canopy specifically?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm not aware of any discussion of that nature, but that's not to say it didn't occur.
Sorry, just to help there, in relation to the design review panel, there's comments in the report that state that there was a recommendation to reduce parking on site to allow for more amenity. So perhaps we could just see whether the applicant responded to that suggestion from the design review panel. Councillor Hallett, have you finished asking questions? I feel that you have a few left in you. Yep.
On page 79 in the officer response to the community objections, it states that a condition has been imposed for 30% canopy, but elsewhere in the report it refers to 18.4 within the lot boundary. Can you clarify that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the reference to 30% on page 79 is an error and should have referred to 18.4% within the lot boundary and 22% overall. That can be corrected during the week.
Just wondering about, just struggling a little bit to understand in terms of the concerns by the design review panel about overdevelopment and admin recommending a third reduction in canopy. I think it relates to the Mayor's comment, I think previously around the relevance of a built form policy and those provisions. Can you just clarify why we haven't kind of tried to stick with the built form policy?
Through you, Mayor Cole, page 59 covers the issue of landscaping, as does page 60. Staff are of the view that whilst compliance with the quantum parameters isn't quite achieved, that there are other areas on the site that actually add to landscaping. So whilst it's not a straight black and white matter of compliance, the quantity and quality of landscaping over the site is deemed to satisfy the general intent of that provision.
Sorry, just two more. A neighbouring property raised concerns about there only being a single access driveway, suggesting it will cause confusion with vehicles going in and out, and admin have responded partly to that. Is the condition related to truncation in front of the bin store the main way that we're getting around that to resolve that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the truncation is not to enable compliance. The application is compliant in terms of parking and access. It is simply a modest change to add to the ease of use for residents and visitors. So even without the condition, the proposal would be compliant, but this will just improve the flow of traffic in the area.
And please forgive my ignorance. Why do visitor car bays need to not be behind security measures? Is it because they're more likely to use the street instead?
Through you, Mayor Coles, just simply for convenience of the user. So they don't have to actually buzz in or use some other mechanism to access the bays. They're freely available in front of a barrier.
Okay. So on page 92 of the agenda, there's what I assume is a previous iteration that received comments from the then Design Advisory Committee, that the intent was for the design elements of the streetscape to be not to be mimicked. That was the quote from the DAC. So I guess, and I also note that these are the only, on page 92, those 3D elevations are actually showing the arbour at growth, but the plans that are recommended for approval don't actually show, they do in the landscaping plan, but the actual elevations don't show the arbour having grown over there. But I guess just looking at getting from that as a design treatment to what the applicant has submitted finally, we're seeing a increase in the level of plain render and also the prevalence of new red brick, or exposed red brick. And it's not lost on me that the same building designer is featuring in this week's agenda, but there's the same treatment being proposed elsewhere. Can I just ask, and I know that we also have the same planning consultant dealing with two applications. His comment wasn't in relation to this, but I'll ask again in relation to Milton Street anyway. But there was an indication that the inclusion of new red brick finished as face brick is somehow referencing the existing streetscape. Was that something that was either the direction of or supported by the DAC, to your knowledge? And I'm happy for it to be taken on notice, because there's certainly a visual difference between recycled brick or brick of the era and new red brick that's finished in face brick in this manner visually. I'm just, I guess, asking the question as to whether that was driven by the applicant in response to request or whether it was specifically at request of either the city or the DAC. And I'm happy for it to be taken on notice because I assume you wouldn't have the answer having not been present at those meetings.
Through you, Mayor Cole, if I could take that on notice, that would be appreciated.
Further questions? Director, I do wish to ask a question about the landscaping in relation to the tree canopy. When I look at the plans, I'm just wondering, given that screening has come up as one of the big issues, would it not be possible to increase the tree canopy and particularly target that along where the balconies interact with the adjoining properties?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that would be a reasonable response to that site.
I'd just like to flag an amendment to increase the tree canopy to 30% with some targeted planting to assist screening between the neighbours on that elevation. And just further, many of the comments appear to be about the way in which this development interacts with the existing homes in the area. Obviously, there's been a request for different types of screening. Does the city have the ability to determine what type of screening will be used, or as long as it's compliant, is it up to the applicant to determine that they can have, for example, slatted versus opaque glass?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the R Code set out various options for an applicant to comply with the deemed to comply standards, so effectively it falls to the applicant to make their application, and in this case they've done that, and it is a compliant proposal, and therefore it's not up to council to dictate back to the applicant.
Given it's not up to council to dictate back to the applicant, would it be possible for administration to discuss with the applicant the concerns of the neighbours about the interaction between the private areas of the two, the existing and the proposed development, and to discuss with the applicant whether they would be open to voluntarily considering a different screening solution and consideration of a 1.7 metre height screen.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes it would, and we'll do that in the following week.
Thank you, Director. Are there any further questions? Okay, we'll move on to item 5.4, number 33A, Redfern Street, North Perth, group dwelling. Questions? Any questions on Redfern? Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg.
Just wanting to seek clarity with the provisions of our Built Form Policy 7.1.1 in relation to landscaping provision, and also the open space calculation, just in relation to that 25 metre access way from Redfern Street to the property being considered both in the calculation of open space and also in our landscaping calculations. Can you just confirm both the open space calculation, but also my understanding is that because our policy is silent on it and it is considered part of the lot, that therefore the landscaping can be included in that access way. But can we get clarity, please?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, the term open space is defined by the R codes, and that does include open walkway areas. I note there is a reference to the definition of private open space, which doesn't include such areas, but the actual deemed to comply provision of the R codes refers to open space specifically. So, long story short is that yes, that area can be incorporated into the calculation of open space, and similarly with the landscaping provision, it does form part of the subject site, and therefore any landscaping that falls within that subject site can be counted.
Councillors? Director, I have a few questions just in relation to the setback from the right-of-way being 1.5 metres. Given this is that there are, I think it mentions 3 properties that front Macro Lane currently, are you confident that a 1.5 metre setback to the right-of-way is the right setback and the right precedent to be setting in this largely undeveloped right-of-way?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, staff are satisfied that the 1.5 metre setback is acceptable. Obviously, with the built form pattern that's occurred up until now, there's no ability to have the five-a-side calculation tested. Staff do appreciate the realities of the site and the size and configuration, and on balance have considered that a 1.5 metre setback is acceptable. If the building was pushed further back into the site to increase that front setback, there's the potential for exacerbating impacts at the rear of the site, unless the dwelling was comprehensively redesigned. So, with the landscaping proposed by the applicant, the staff are satisfied that 1.5 metres is acceptable.
And is that acceptable just for this lot or for an emerging streetscape on that right-of-way?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I would suggest that if other applications, similar applications were lodged with similar landscaping treatments and similar built form proposals, the 1.5 metres would also be considered acceptable.
Thank you. I also have a question about the landscaping, 16% canopy cover. There is talk about roof garden, etc. Have all options been explored in terms of maximising canopy cover for the site? I know that this is a single dwelling, therefore landscape architecture plans are not part of it, but is there anything more that can be done? Could we potentially provide advice to the applicant through our parks team, for example, to see whether the plantings are suitable and workable and whether there's any capacity to deliver greater canopy from this site?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I don't believe so. The staff have met with the applicant following the previous deferral and discussed these issues at length. Separate to that, staff have sought advice from the Parks branch The reference to 16% canopy cover is a direct result of the liaison with that branch, so I don't believe there's anything more staff could do in that space.
Thank you. Glad to hear that there's been a comprehensive process. Also, I just want to ask about the legibility of the front door from the right-of-way. When you look closely, you can see that there is a fence and a gate coming from the side access off the crossover. Are you confident that that presents as a legible front door from the right-of-way for the purposes of what we would expect to have on a right-of-way?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, whilst acknowledged that the porch and the door is recessed somewhat between the front room and the garage, we're satisfied that the configuration of the dwelling does actually lead pedestrians to that front door.
Thank you. And just in relation to the first floor balcony, which is screened on the side to 1.2 metres, I note this is similar to Councillor Castle's question that it does talk about it overlooking a garage. Just whether the privacy of the neighbour has been fully considered in the balcony screening to 1.2 metres.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, it has. Similar to the other application, we are considering that the garage being in situ, and that and the recommendation is that is acceptable. If hypothetically the garage was not there, the assessment may well be different, but we've assessed it based on the situation we have in front of us.
I'm just interested to know that given that there is a bit of an emerging right-of-way streetscape here, would it be probable that that's going to be developed into the future?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's certainly possible. If it suits council, we can prepare some additional information on that during the week.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions? Councillor Fotakis.
Through you, Mayor Cole. It's just a clarification on a couple of the points that are discussed, the canopy coverage. Clause 5.14 refers to the proposal at a 3.2%. Is that a typo, Director?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, that is not a typo.
Just also with regards to just looking at the layout on that site, when calculating the canopy cover, I just noticed the proximity of the rear of 33 Redfern Street to the outdoor area. What impact does the calculation, when you're calculating the canopy, what impact does the proximity of that neighbouring property come into play? I'm just concerned that over time, with the maturity of the trees and the very real risk of neighbours complaining about that and what impact that has on us actually even achieving close to that 16% at maturity.
Through you, Mayor Cole, a few questions ago I referenced the process we've been through in terms of consulting with the applicant and the city's parks branch. As part of that consultation, we've arrived at the view that the actual location of those proposed trees on the rear boundary line are not the most effective way of providing landscaping. So staff have captured that through the proposed condition 5.1 and are happy to further liaise with the applicant, if in fact it's approved, to work through a workable solution in conjunction with our parks team. But we certainly acknowledge that having trees that close to the boundary could be problematic, given that any overhang may well be removed. So we would be suggesting that the actual trees be brought into the property with a greater amount of canopy on the property and less canopy overhanging into a neighbouring yard.
Councillors, any further questions?
Through you, Chair, to the Director, there's a number of photos which show setbacks along Macquarie Lane. Are you able to provide for next week the year that these buildings were built?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can provide that.
Thank you.
Anything further on this item? Okay, we will move on. The next item is item 5.5, number 16 Howlett Street, North Perth, change of use from office to an unlisted use dog daycare. Questions?
I have a question in regards to the Director, through you, Chair. They're proposing to have 30 dogs on site. Would the officer's recommendation differ, or would the concerns be minimised if there were less dogs on site per day?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'd suggest the concerns would decrease if the numbers of proposed dogs were going to decrease. That said, it wouldn't necessarily change the staff recommendation so as to be a positive one, but obviously the fewer dogs to be housed on the property, the less problematic the application could potentially be.
Okay, through you, Chair, to the Director. My other question is, I'm actually surprised that this is, I'm not sure in my time here we've had a proposal previously for a doggy daycare of this sort. Are officers able to identify any other areas within the City of Vincent that would not raise the same concerns as this, that is, proximity to residential areas? On notice is fine.
Through you, Mayor Cole, not off the top of my head, but could certainly give that some thought during the week and suggest any alternative sites that may be possible.
Can I just follow up on that question? I think it is a good question to ask, and I'd noted that down too, because this is the first application of its kind to come to council. So I think it would be great for council to know that if we wanted to support dog daycare, and if it was found that this isn't the ideal location for the reasons outlined in the report, where in Vincent could we consider such a facility? Would it need to be wholly indoor, or could there be an outdoor element? And examples of other doggy daycares in similar areas would be really interesting. For example, I know that one has recently emerged in Maylands in a commercial area fronting Watley Street. So it would just be good to know if, for the various reasons outlined in the report, this isn't the situation, the ideal situation, where could this potentially be accommodated? Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the Director of Development Services. This is in relation to the noise report, and I apologise if I've totally got this wrong. So can I just confirm in relation to the noise assessment that it's the officer's observation that the application of the 15 decibel adjustment to the noise levels is appropriate because the dog barking noise is assessed as being higher than local background noise in the area? Because it's my understanding from the discussion in the document that if the adjustment was not applied, the development would be seen as compliant with the noise regulations. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, if I could take that on notice and report back in the briefing notes, please.
Councillors, any further questions? Okay, the next item is 5.6, number 48 Milton Street, Mount Hawthorn, proposed 5 dwellings. Any questions? Just a reminder at any point, if a council member does wish to support an application that's recommended for refusal, that please do put in a request for an alternative motion in advance to help preparation on the night. I'm not saying that to suggest anything. I'm just saying that in previous occasions we have had quite a slowdown at council meetings. So on this item, Director, I did have just a clarification on the deep soil zone. I see that the Canopy is 40%. For this application, the applicant believes they can achieve 40%. So firstly, just double checking that that's been conditioned at 40%, and secondly, can you provide a deep soil zone calculation for the site?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it isn't included as a recommended condition on the basis that the application is recommended for refusal.
Of course, sorry.
And what was your second question, sorry?
Would it be possible to get a deep soil zone calculation?
Yes, it would be.
And the other question was in relation to the verge tree, which is dealt with in an arborist report. I just wanted to ask about the arborist report. Was that done at the request of the city in relation to the poor tree health, or was that provided by the applicant at their discretion?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm not sure, but I'll provide that back to the briefing notes.
And just a follow-up question on that, it talked about the verge tree potentially being affected by underground power. Was that work that took place by the applicant in order to provide the power, the new power dome for the site? I'm just wondering how that work came about, which potentially led to the demise of the tree health.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll check that as well and report back to the briefing notes.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. We heard from Mr. Merger that, in his words, a number of changes were made to address the concerns that had led to the recommendation for refusal previously. Number of meetings with council officers. And the inclusion of red face brick in accordance with the city's request. Can I just clarify exactly how that request was made? Was that feedback from DAC? Was that planning officers making that request? And again, I understand you probably won't have the answer, but it's the applicant's understanding that the city requested red face brick, and also the laser cut fence as well, if we can just get some clarity as to how those changes arose. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I'll investigate that and report back to the briefing notes.
Any further questions? Okay, next item is 5.7, North Perth Common Concept Design. Questions? Director or Manager of Policy and Place, I just noted that in the report some of the site, I guess we'd call them site constraints, weren't discussed, and I thought it might be worth discussing the overhead power lines. I think that there might be interest in understanding that, and the fact that it was looked at the city and the potential costs involved, and also the fact that we do still need to maintain the two-way car access. Yep.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, within the as part of doing the project, the city investigated the option of potentially undergrounding the power in this portion of View Street between Fitzgerald Street and for the extent of the site. As part of that investigation, it was estimated that the cost to underground the power was somewhere in the order of $300,000 to $400,000, and for that reason, and given that it wasn't in the project budget or scope initially, that was considered to be prohibitive in this instance, though it is possible at some point in the future, if council would like to undertake that work as a future stage in the project. Sorry, what was the second?
The second, it was mainly about sort of potentially just a request about whether some of this information might be considered for inclusion in the report, just for the public record, and also on the underground power, the issue that it could be done without having to rip up the work that will happen through North Perth Common. I think that would be useful information if that's agreed by administration.
Through you, Michael, yeah, we can provide that in the council report for next week.
And I think the other issue that has been raised through the working group and just through general comments from the community is about the two-way traffic access and how that works with Elmer Road being a black spot, etc., and just some of those issues around traffic flow and management might be of interest also to the community.
Yep. We'll include that in the council report for next week.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, Councillor Toppelberg?
I'm just wanting to clarify that so I'm on page 350, which is the last page of this part of the report, the views from the alfresco area. Just to clarify that the imagery or artworks that are depicted on the back of the seating and also on the uprights of the columns are, seeking clarity, I suppose, indicative, and that the process, obviously that will be resolved through detailed design, but whether that is driven by the project and build team or whether that is driven by a community is yet to be determined, and there is potential for those spaces to be available for public art of some description, or if you look closely at the poll there, potentially wayfinding even.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, all of the perspective drawings that are shown attached to the report are just indicative, including the artwork, and I note that there's also temporary seating and umbrellas that are shown, which are just indicative for the purpose of illustration. Through the detailed design phase of the project, we will be looking more closely at exactly how the lighting structure poles and the seating and any other opportunities for community involvement or public art.
Through you, Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, just going back to the question that you asked, Mayor, in regards to the two-way traffic. So sorry if I missed the intent of that, but are we preparing options that show, in addition to the two-way, that there be no traffic or that there be single lanes, such as Mary Street Piazza, for outgoing traffic turning left onto Fitzgerald, but not allowing traffic to turn left into that street from Fitzgerald Street?
Through you, Mayor Cole, at this stage in the project, it's just proposed for there to be one concept with two-way traffic. The reason for that was that at the time in July last year, when the consultation on this project was considered by council, it was specifically requested that we maintain two-way traffic in this location because of the broader traffic impact in the surrounding area, including on Alma Road. So it's not proposed for there to be any additional concept plan proposed with showing just one-way traffic. But I do note that there has been discussion about the potential to close off the site for community events or things like that, so closing it off to traffic. And through the detailed design stage, we'll be looking at what options are available for the city to potentially install some sort of retractable bollard or system in place so that that can be closed off for vehicular traffic for events.
Through you, Chair, can I just ask, has there been a traffic study done of the usage of that street for two-way traffic? Or a traffic flow study done?
Through you, Mayor Cole, if I take that question, not to my knowledge, but in the next few days we'll check that and put it in the briefing notes, if that's okay.
Further questions? I just also have a further question, just in relation to the recommendation. It talks about administration notifying North Perth local and all residents, landowners and businesses within 500 metres of the site of council's decision. Would it be possible to include the North Perth Primary School? I'm sort of taking it as a given that we're going to notify the state government, given that they've made a $250,000 contribution, but we might need to formally note that we do need to advise them. And also I thought, whilst it, it's obviously the officer's recommendation, it can be amended, but it might also be worthwhile mentioning that the Vincent community will be informed via our website and online communication, just so that we keep that communication with the rest of our Vincent community as well.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can certainly add that to the recommendation. And I note that there's some communications that have been put out already in relation to the project.
Thank you. Any further questions on North Perth Common? Okay, next item is Business Advisory Group key priorities. Questions? No. I did have a couple of questions. I welcome the priorities. I did wonder about some of them. It's quite brief and it's hard to flesh out exactly what it means. I'm not sure whether this is the document for it, but things like town centre management and tenancy advocacy particularly piqued my interest. I'm just wondering whether, in terms of outlining the priorities, whether it would be worthwhile considering a little more detail, and also whether anything around local independent business could also potentially be captured under people. Just some questions around that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, so these key priorities were developed in consultation with the city's business advisory group. I note that they are quite brief, but the intent of the priorities is that they will be embedded into our business engagement program and economic development strategy review, and that the intent being that we would review what the city is doing in that space. For example, with tenancy advocacy, we'd get an understanding of the lay of the land, so to speak, and understand what our role may be and flesh out exactly what that means through the economic development strategy, rather than having all of that detail in these priorities at this stage. In terms of your comment about the independent retailers, that's certainly something that we can go back to the business advisory group on during the week and see if they're open to including that in their priorities.
Any further questions on this item? No? Okay. We're on to engineering now. So the first item for engineering is the 6.1 Vincent Greening Plan review. Questions?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the Director of Engineering. Yes, I think. Yes. The tree selection tool. Sorry, Andrew. The document describes the tool in the appendix, and how are we going to promote broader access to it? The interactive part of the tool.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we'll promote it through our normal mechanisms, through Facebook marketing, and our website. That's what will be available. That's how you'll connect to it. So that's the intention.
And is it intended that the tool will be made use of through the development application process? So people will be encouraged through that process to access the tool there?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's something that we hadn't considered, I think, in detail, but that certainly makes sense, and that's something I'll have a conversation with my colleagues in development services about. I think it is a useful tool, and it would fit that requirement, so I think it's a good idea.
Yes.
I note that the plan is sort of broken up into two there's two sections in relation to the review of the previous plan, and then the next iteration of the plan. For readability going forward, I wondered whether it had been considered to include the review of the previous plan either as a separate document or as an appendix, rather than sort of as earlier in the actual current plan, if that makes sense.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we hadn't considered that. I mean, the document is longer than we would like, I think, so that's certainly a good suggestion and something we could look at in the next few days. Putting the review as an appendix would direct readers, straight to the issues that we're dealing with now, and they can read the review if they really wanted to. So I think that's not a bad idea, and we'll consider it and put something in the notes.
An excellent suggestion. I just wanted to follow up to say that I was going to ask a similar question. I also wondered about the table that deals with how we developed the Greening Plan 2018. To me, that did read as a working document. So I thought that also could potentially be an appendices or an appendix rather, or a feature elsewhere, that just for your consideration.
Through McCall, thank you. That's a good suggestion. We'll look at it in the next couple of days.
Thank you. Any further questions on the greening plan? Okay, next item is the 2008 Greening Vincent Garden Awards. The most exciting event of the year. Yeah. Fiercely sought after positions on the judging panel. Any questions? Would anyone wants to do a show of hands of where the interest lies at this early stage, or do you want to battle it out at the council meeting next Tuesday? You're showing your hand. Oh, we already have 3. They were fast. Wow. Just in terms of how we've tried to manage it, there are those that haven't had a go and those that have had a go, we can perhaps negotiate amongst ourselves. But so far we've had expressions of interest from Councillor Gonchevsky, Councillor Castle and Councillor Hallett. Council members, please feel free to express your interest between here and next Tuesday or at the meeting if you want to have an election on the night.
Excuse me, Mayor, may I ask who around this table hasn't sat on the judging panel before?
Thank you. All right, Councillor Toppenberg, you have a question?
I do. We did ask it a couple of years ago, and I'm going to keep forgetting about it for probably 11 months of the year, but given that we have a briefing session, just a question through you to the Director, and perhaps I'll consider something in between, but has there been consideration of a prize that is perhaps equal in value but not cash, and actually providing something of value or something that returns itself to community rather than just giving cash? I mean, it's a significant... I'll talk to that next week, but I'll just ask whether we've considered something other than cash prizes that we can be sure returns itself to the community of Vincent in some way if we're dishing out a couple of $1,000.
Director?
Through you, Michael. I don't think alternatives have been considered. I mean, we certainly can consider that. It's that if that's something that's going to be raised next week, we could. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Michael.
Bookshop vouchers. Local independent retailer vouchers.
7,000 seedlings at the next native plant sale.
We have some beautiful emerging plant stalls around Vincent. So any further questions, Councillor Castle?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I have a question, possibly for consideration for next year's competition, given our new verge policy and street tree swing allowance. Maybe it's worth considering another category or an update to the verge category that addresses our best verge treatment.
I love it.
That's right.
It's actually
best
compliant.
non-injuring tree swing.
That's an excellent idea. So you're saying for next year or this year?
Well, I thought if it was this year, it might not give residents much time to actually
do it this year.
Well, yeah, and perhaps considering there's lots of them out there that have been there for a long time anyway. It's possible, but whether that's doable in the time frame.
Perhaps administration could consider a new category. Perhaps Mayor's Encouragement Award could change.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. If we discuss it online, get some ideas, we'll look at what the options are. That's no problem. Bearing in mind the verge policy is out to consultation very soon, so there's a little bit of a time lag in that.
Any further questions on the Greening Awards? Okay. Next item is the Draft Waste Strategy 2018 to 2023, item 6.3. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the Director of Engineering, I just had a question a couple of questions in relation to the, I guess, the life of this strategy and proposed review date, given that in the first year of the strategy there are a number of projects that are going to be undertaken that will, I guess, inform more detailed understanding of our waste position and options going forward, and also support the development of targets Just so I guess I'd like some advice as to how long we would expect this strategy to remain as is, sort of presented.
Yeah, through you, Michael. So the strategy formally is 5 years, but you'll see the vision, the target of zero waste to landfill is actually a 10-year target. So we're looking beyond the 5 years, and we're looking at with some certainty the work that we need to do over the next 5 years. Councillor, you're correct. There's a lot of work up front in the first year because we need to make some decisions going forward quite quickly, particularly in line with the budget process next year. I think the intention would be that those will form reports to Council for decision, and that we would do an annual review as part of the corporate business plan. That would be the intention. So I suppose the simple answer to the question is that we would anticipate that the strategy would be reviewed on an annual basis.
Okay, I'd just like to flag that I think it's reasonably important that we sort of delineate this first period of work, and I was wondering whether there would be any appetite to consider labelling this as an interim waste strategy, just so that it is quite clear that there is a body of work that's being done, we have a plan for it, but that it's going to be perhaps reviewed and redrafted once those preliminary bodies of work have been complete.
Through you, Michael, that isn't a problem. I mean, there's a lot of logic behind, there's a lot of work up front in the first year. So if we were to write somewhere in the document that we would review the strategy in 12 months' time, that would make sense to me.
I was just asking the CEO for his view, and whether it's still the waste strategy, but a year in, because there's fundamental changes, whether we could wholly rewrite it in the way that we, as the CEO suggests, we do our corporate business plan. You want to comment?
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Ultimately, that's entirely open to Council to decide. My opinion, which I've very briefly expressed to the Mayor, was that I think it's appropriate to just call it a waste strategy, because even if Council only seeks to apply the current text and actions of the strategy for 1 year or 2 years, it is still the strategy that's providing wayfinding on this topic for that period, even if Council treats that as an interim period, recognising that the results from the first couple of years' worth of work will actually inform and shape the future direction of that document. But I actually think that inherently that's the advantage of having a proper strategy that is actually an evolving document that that is improved upon as time goes on. So look, my view is that it could stay as it is, as the waste strategy. It might pay, though, to pick up Councillor Gontaszewski's relevant point, to bolster up a section of the document that deals with the iterative process. As council members will recall, we'd previously discussed and included some text about the review and renewal process through our draft strategic community plan. Perhaps we could do something of the same here, so that it's obvious and apparent to the reader upon first review of this draft strategy that the intention is that the actions arising from those first phases of work will actually inform the further actions and information to be contained in the strategy subsequent to its annual review, as the Director said.
Do you think, to further deal with Councillor Gontaszewski's point, that it might need to point to the fact that the first year is going to be a significant development period in the strategy, and that there will be quite significant review of the document arising from the forming of those targets? Just to note that up front, I think that it will significantly change in that first 12 months, potentially.
Yeah, through you, Michael, I agree with the CEO, obviously, that we'll and the Mayor, I agree with the Mayor. We'll strengthen up some wording about the review process, how it feeds into the annual plans, etc. And I think that would be sensible. It is very heavy on year one, so we'll reflect that in some of the text.
Councillor Fotakis.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Just in looking through the document, and I'm not too sure whether this is the right forum or the right place to flag a couple of things that I think, and just the same as the plan, I think it's really going to, as we dig deeper into it and it's implemented, are going to highlight some areas that maybe we want increased focus. And for me, becomes more and more apparent, and we've got point 6, waste and recycling education awareness and promotional programs. A visit to recycling plant today highlighted to me that there's a lot to be done in education and awareness, and it's not just within Vincent. It's a statewide coordinated issue, and I know in point 10 we've raised advocacy for change of policy and legislation, but in my heart I know from past experience that this
Councillor
probably...
Fotakis, I'm assuming a question is coming.
It is. So that the need for statewide coordinated education. So is there scope within this document for us to highlight the need, not just on advocacy, on policy and legislation, but on the need for more broader education?
Yeah, through you, Michael. The project, I'm just looking, 6 is about education, and what we'll do is we'll look at the wording about that. I agree with you. We visited the site today, and you can see the problems we have with contamination across the region. So working together as a group is a sensible outcome. So we'll perhaps reflect that in the wording.
Any further questions on the waste strategy? Okay. Thank you, Director of Engineering. We're now moving to corporate services. The first item is item 7.1, variation of Kitty's Learning Hub Proprietary Limited's licence to use Banks Reserve Pavilion to include an additional 1 hour on Mondays and extend the licence term to the 28th of June 2019. It's a very descriptive title. Any questions on that item? It's quite self-explanatory, really.
I did just have one.
You do have a question?
No,
Good, go.
it's just in relation to the 6-month notice period. I know when this first came to before council, this lease, there had been discussion at that point in time in relation to the, master planning process that was happening on the site, and the applicant was aware that was happening. I just wanted to get confirmation or understand whether the clause in relation to the 6-month notice period has been discussed with the applicant. Perhaps through you to the Director of Corporate Services.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, it has been discussed with the applicant and they're aware of it.
Councillor Castle, go.
Through you, Mayor, I just have a follow-up question to that. In those discussions, is there any indication that they might accept a shorter notice period? And given that if we are to forge ahead with some of the options for Banks Reserve, which may include significant changes to that building, is 6 months seems quite a long time.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we haven't discussed a shorter notice period. We did have some discussions around whether 6 months was the appropriate amount of time, given the lead time that we would need to action anything else. So 6 months was considered appropriate. We can certainly discuss with the applicant if a shorter notice period would be acceptable to them.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just on that particular point, the reason that the 6-month time frame has been recommended by administration, it hasn't expressly, to my knowledge, been requested by the the licensee, is that we thought, well, as a landlord acting reasonably, 6 months probably is an appropriate period of time of forewarning to provide the tenant with official notice that they're going to have to vacate the premises for whatever reason, and that the lease will be, or the licence would be terminated. Additionally, we were considering that the trigger point for that notice would be a decision being made by council on the future and fate of that particular building that's currently occupied. And 6 months, whilst it probably sounds a little bureaucratic, is not an unreasonably long period of time to wait from when a decision is made by council that would trigger that notice of termination. It may well be that if council agrees to a master plan and that master plan is quite prescriptive as to the outcomes for that particular building and the time frame in which that's going to occur, then we would easily exceed the 6-month notice period by the time that council makes a decision on a master plan, decision is formalised and relevant approvals are obtained for demolition, as well as tendering or quotations, and we go through the procurement exercise to physically get the space vacated and then the building demolished. We just felt that 6 months is probably reasonable for the tenant, as well as aligned to as long as it would realistically take us to exercise that decision if council made it.
Councillors, any further questions on this item? Okay, the next item is 7.2, acquisition of private rights of way as Crown land investing in the city, right of way between London and Dunedin Streets, North Perth, and Colvin Lane, West Perth. Any questions? I just did have a question. I wanted to clarify, is that not Mount Hawthorn rather than North Perth, that area?
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I'll need to take that on notice. I'm not sure. I'll check it.
Thank you. And next item is 7.3, authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st of May to 31st of May 2018. Councillor Harley.
Through you, Mayor, to the Director of Finance, I'm just referring to the credit card transactions and the You Choose gift cards recognition, employee recognition gift cards, $4,048.72. CEO is smiling because he knows what I'm about to ask.
Go
on, your turn.
Sorry.
Speak.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm happy to answer the question because I know exactly what the question is going to be.
Would you like me to ask the question?
Sure, by all means.
Just for the record. I'm wanting to find out whether this is being done under a staff recognition policy or whether that has now been put aside, and or whether this exists in a staff EBA.
Through you, Mayor Cole, this is one of the many HR and employee policies that have been in place and which predate my arrival at the city about 4 years ago. I'm pleased to say that through liaison with various staff representatives, this policy has now been rescinded and replaced with a much more contemporary recognition of employee policy. The current policy under which these expenses have been incurred was originally adopted by Council. It's policy number 5.5.10 relating to recognition of employees. I've mentioned at a number of previous occasions when similar expenditure has been included and come before Council that that is at odds with my approach to employee recognition, and I don't believe is in step with what our community would expect in the fashion that we should reward and recognise the good work of our staff. As a consequence, a much more contemporary policy has been adopted that many staff, if not most staff, feel very comfortable with, that doesn't involve this type of financial reward and recognition. In many cases, not necessarily for the performance of the job in line with council and community expectations. The current the former policy is quite outdated in my opinion because it recognises years of service above many other performance measures that that in a more contemporary organisation are the true measures of good outcomes and conduct.
Thank you. Just another question through you, Chair. Does that? Thank you. That's a great answer. I'm also wanting to find out whether that policy applies to the vouchers that are provided upon retirement.
Through you, Mayor Cole, my recollection is that yes, it does, but the new policy does not treat any of that in the same fashion. No.
Any further questions on the expenditure? Okay, moving on to item 7.4, investment report as at the 31st of May 2018. Questions? Councillor Toppelberg.
I do ask it every few years, and so I'll just ask again this time because it's my first time for the current director. But can we just get some information in relation to our vast share portfolio of 11,000 shares in one company, and whether you're yeah, I'm happy for it to be provided in the briefing notes, but I know how it came into existence, but what the long-term strategy is: hold them, sell them, grow them, shrink them. If we can get some commentary from you in the briefing notes, that would be great. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is something that we're looking into, spending some time looking into it at the moment. I'm very happy to answer that in the briefing notes.
Any further questions on the investment report? Okay, item 7.5, financial statements as at the 31st of May 2018. Questions? Okay. 7.6, delegated authority review 2018. No. And 7.7, late report, adoption of the 2018-19 annual budget. Questions? I will ask a question, Director. It's just in relation to the submission from the Public Gallery this evening from Josh O'Keefe about the expenditure on the dog park furniture. Would you be able to just pull out what Council is proposing to spend, the total combined figure for the paving and the additional seating versus what was sought from the community budget submission, and where the shortfall is and what the difference is in what's proposed in the budget versus what was sought?
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Yes, we will be able to do that.
Any other questions on the budget? It's been a pretty thorough 5 workshops on that one, so I can understand you're not bursting with questions. Okay, thank you, Director. Moving on to community engagement. We have one item tonight, 8.1, community engagement policies. Questions on this item? I have a question. Acting Director, you're not getting away that easily. You ready for it? You're here, you might as well take a question. Okay, so my question is, where is the open streets policy? Open streets policy, not to be confused with the street party policy. But it may be confused with that, so I think that's what... yes.
It is, okay. That's being worked on at the moment. We'll be able to bring that to the next council meeting in July.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Any other questions on this item? Okay. Moving on to Chief Executive Officer items. The first item is 9.1, revised terms of reference for various advisory groups. Any questions on this item? Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just 2 notes in relation to the Safer Vincent Advisory Group. I think these advice was provided via email from myself and Councillor Fotakis, but I'm not sure that it's been incorporated. Just in relation to Safer Vincent, in 4.1, the heading says 2 council members with 2 in brackets, but the text underneath says up to 3 council members, but then in brackets has 2. Is that meant to be there? And 4.2 and 4.5 appear to reference the same group of members, as in the external representatives, and the question was whether these references should be combined into one point.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm happy to look at all of those and discuss them with the relevant directors and also the manager governance.
CEO, no, it's just come to my attention there was a replacement page. I've been having some issues with my iPad, and is it fixed, Joe? Councillor Vitago, sorry. I take it all back and apologise.
Yeah, just refer to replacement page 682.
Does that satisfy your question, Councillor Gonchevsky?
My question appears to have disappeared.
Well, sounds like that's not a bad thing. Are there any other questions on the terms of reference for the advisory groups? Okay, thank you. The next item is 9.2, appointment of an alternate member for Mindarie Regional Council on the 5th of July 2018. Whilst we would be appointing someone at next Tuesday night's council meeting, it would be extremely helpful if I could have a volunteer that I know will be going to the meeting in advance so that I can actually brief that member, because if it's decided at the Tuesday night meeting, it will be a very long night because I'll have to brief the member following the council meeting. So just if there is any interest in attending that meeting, it will be Councillor Gonchevsky. Is anyone going to cause a debate? Okay. As Deputy Mayor, I think that's very appropriate. So I'd just like to say thank you. We'll note you down as expressing interest, and I will brief you on some emerging issues in advance of next Tuesday. Thank you. Any further not comments, any questions? No? Okay. Item 9.3, late item corporate business plan 2018-19 to 2021-22. Any questions? Okay. 9.4, community budget submissions we dealt with first, as there were 2 questions from the public gallery on that item, and that takes us to item 9.5, information bulletin. Any questions? No? Okay. We have one more item, but it is a confidential item. So at this point we will finish our live stream. So we say good night to those who've joined us on the live stream. Thank you.